Hello, everyone. Well, Julian Treasure, an old friend, is back, and he is the sound and communications expert behind 5 TED Talks with over 150 million views. Founder of the sound agency and author of the new book, Sound Effects, a fascinating look at how sounds shape our emotions, our decisions, and our relationships. In this episode, we're very fortunate to talk again about how we can listen and how it builds trust, how sound influences partnership dynamics, and why tuning into tone may be the most underrated leadership skill. Julian Treasure, welcome back to the Partnership Playbook.
Oh, thank you, Phil. Absolutely delighted to be back with you again.
Let's start with the history for those who have not listened to our first conversation around TED. And when we were originally doing the research for our first conversation, the TED Talk that I saw was you having an entire audience engage with this idea of hearing and listening. Can we revisit that starting point? Because that spawned a number of amazing TED Talks you've done, which we'll link to in the show notes. Tell us about that starting point for where sound started for you to be really important in your life.
Well, I think that's about 6, actually. I was lucky enough to have a quite enlightened mum who was into music and who bought me some lovely records, Peter and the Wolf, Carnival of the Animals, those kind of A Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, the kind of classics which were written for children. And I was listening to those avidly from a very young age. And of course, as I grew rather older, I started to develop my own tastes. But, you know, the passion for music and the importance of music to me, that powerful effect of that sound, that was there from a very, very young age. And then I became a musician. I learned to play piano first and then drums, and then started playing in bands. And that's what I did for a very long time. So I think all musicians have this kind of attentive multi-track listening. You have to be listening to all the other players in your orchestra or band or whatever it is while you're doing something pretty complicated. And in many cases, also reading music. So it's a pretty heavy load on the brain. It requires a great deal of neural activity, which may be why musicians have bigger brains than non-musicians. As I say in the book, the corpus callosum is well known to be more developed in musicians because of all that multitasking that you're doing at any one time. But certainly I carried that kind of attentive multi-track listening through into my daily life. So I've always been very conscious of sound. It's my primary interface with the world. And so through a long marketing career, I was, working with big brands, making beautiful magazines for them and thinking, why are they not conscious of the noise they're making in shops or in restaurants or in their corporate reception or in their offices or all sorts of places, which is so damaging. It's so bad for people. And so when I sold the magazine business, I started the sound agency, which I ran for 20 years. Actually, I closed it last year to focus on this mission. And with the sound agency, I wrote a book called Sound Business, which was about using sound effectively in business. And we can certainly talk about that a bit. Then I had an epiphany after a few years. I think it was after I'd done my first 2 TED Talks, which are about sound and how it affects us, which is very important, even though most people are not conscious of it. I had this epiphany about why organizations are so bad at this, why they don't listen, why not many of them do audio branding, for example. They don't have a sonic logo. They don't think about the sound in their spaces. And the answer is, if you put a whole bunch of people who don't listen into an organization, what you get is an organization that doesn't listen and doesn't have any consciousness of sound like that. And that's what happens. So my 3rd TED Talk was about listening. The 4th one was a plea to architects to start designing spaces that are actually fit for purpose, which many, many, many aren't, sadly. Homes, offices, schools, hospitals, far too noisy, many, many of them. And the final TED Talk was about speaking. And that's the one that went absolutely ballistic. But quite interesting that TED Talk on speaking has been seen by 5 times as many people as the TED Talk on listening. And that really spurred me on. So, I did 20 years of walking around shopping malls, auditing them and helping people to make better sound there. I thought, well, hang on, that's probably enough of that. What I really want to do is get the world listening, because when you look around at the politics, at society, at the internet, at the, trolling and pylons and, the hate that you see under pretty much every news story, every video on YouTube, it's a world now where listening is dying, and the stats bear that out. There's a lot of research on this now. So my mission is to generate listening in the world, and that's where the book came out from, and that's where my new community came out from. So that's where I am right now, and for the rest of my life, I think this is my mission in the world, is to generate listening.
I don't know if it's getting older or paying attention maybe a little bit more to things in the world, but I find that the capacity to be able to listen, but more importantly, not to be overwhelmed by a significant amount of noise. I tend to value that a lot more now. And I find that living in a large capital city, I crave quiet spaces. And I do wonder if there's something that, some mid-40s, I've never heard my parents talk about this, but I do see a lot of my contemporaries really trying to gravitate towards quiet spaces for calm thinking, to try and organize their thoughts. And we're all leaders running reasonably large organizations trying to work out, how do we make great decisions? I fear that there is still a hangover from COVID, where our leadership lives sort of went down a dog life style situation where we all just got older because there was so much to deal with and it was so overwhelming. And I just wonder, whether the need to find quieter spaces and that kind of time to listen and think has been maybe accelerated by that.
It's quite possible. COVID was a pause in the noise, actually. And, you can't think of many benefits for that terrible pandemic, but peace and quiet was possibly the only one. When, the travel stopped and cities went very, very quiet, especially during lockdowns. So you had animals returning. You had things like coyotes walking through cities and whales coming much closer to the shore. And there were all sorts of events which showed that our noise is having a significant impact in the world. And removing it allows a lot of things to happen that weren't happening for a long time. So, yes, I think many people probably became more conscious in that time of peace and quiet and how easy it is to think and communicate in that situation. So it's possible that there was a greater sensitivity there. Also, as you get older, the cocktail effect makes it more difficult to distinguish signal from noise. I went to a dinner on Thursday night before the lovely conference that I was speaking at on Friday in Newcastle, Thinking Digital. I couldn't stay in the room. Like many restaurants, it's all hard surfaces, and there were like 150 people, and the Lombard effect kicks in very quickly, which is I start speaking loud and you start speaking louder and I start speaking louder, and it spirals upwards, and you have 150 people in a loud room. Within minutes, everybody is shouting at the tops of their voices, and I can't tolerate that anymore at my age. I've got some form of hyperacusis going on, I think, but it really is uncomfortable for me. So I had to leave. So yes, I mean, age is a factor. More than half of the world lives in cities now, and cities are inherently noisy places because of the density of population. And that's got two effects, really. One is that people don't have much of a relationship with silence anymore. And that's a very important sound. It's the baseline for all sound. And without a good relationship with silence, I think the noise really does tend to ramp up in one's life. And you get into a lot of not particularly healthy or productive habits, addiction to intensity, lots of things going on, always needing something going on, 2 or 3 inputs at the same time, adrenaline fueled the whole time, all that kind of stuff, where great leaders, I think, are people who do find time to think, ask the right questions, come up with the answers, and communicate them clearly and peacefully to people. So that silence is very important. And the other big missing sound, of course, in cities is the sound of nature, which we are designed to be surrounded by. 300,000 years of Homo sapiens, probably 3 million years of evolution before that, wind, water, and birds. So a lot of my book, Sound Effects, is about those sounds, our sound, and how we are having a devastating effect on those sounds. The sounds of the planet. The sound of the planet itself, which would include running water and all sorts of very big violent sounds as well, volcanoes, earthquakes, those kind of things. And the sound of all living creatures. And there are some, remarkable and amazing sounds out there. But our sound is, by and large, pretty negative in its impact on the world and on us, because noise is just behind air pollution as a killer, and it is having a devastating effect on the health of millions and millions and millions of people around the world, whether that's working in a noisy open plan office day after day, which is stressful and bad for your health. We now know that even 65 decibels, that's not bellowing noise. That's, you or I would have to raise our voices to communicate in that, but not that significantly. Chronic exposure to that level, which is the average noise level in German classrooms, for example, increases your risk of heart attack. So it may well be that teachers are shortening their lives by working in that environment. So really, this whole conversation to me is about becoming conscious about the power of sound to do good, because sound can do wonderful things for us, for our happiness, effectiveness, and productivity. And it can do terrible things if we just let it be noise. So becoming conscious of that so that we can become responsible for the sound that we create and the sound that we consume. That's the key.
It's interesting. You mentioned before that, in business, we spend a lot of time talking and we obsess about the things that come out of our mouths. We're not often great at receiving messages, whether we're distracted, whether we haven't learned how to listen well. What's the biggest misconception that leaders have about listening in your experience?
I would say probably they share this with a lot of people in the world. The vast majority of people in the world is the assumption that everybody listens like I do. They don't. We all listen in a unique way. Everybody's listening is as unique as their fingerprints. And it's a terrible mistake to be talking to a group of people and thinking they all understand, because I would get this. I wouldn't be upset about this, or I'd be excited about this, but you're not speaking to yourself. So when you get this, that everybody's listening is unique, it starts you on a road where you can ask a very important question. What's the listening I'm speaking into? That is such a powerful question for any leader, speaker, public speaker, in a one-to-one conversation. Doesn't matter. If you ask yourself the question, what's the listening I'm speaking into? You become so much more sensitive to that. Now, a group, of course, is composed of various different people with different listenings, but there's a kind of gestalt listening. Now, there's no trick to this. You just ask the question, sensitize yourself, and you will get better and better at intuiting, spotting, sensing the listening you're speaking into. So, a very, very basic example of this would be if I'm speaking to somebody who's very, very slow in the way that they speak, and that's their pace, and I'm going like this, and I'm really, really excited about it, I think that is not going to work. I'm overwhelming them immediately with just my pace. And it may be verbiage, it might be vocabulary, it might be pace, it might be pitch, it might be style. There's all sorts of things that we deliver to people, as well as the words that we're actually using. And it's important to just be sensitive. Is this the best way of getting the ball over the net to this person, this particular person or group of people? So that, I think, is the biggest mistake, is assuming everybody listens like I do.
It's interesting. I don't know who told me this, and it feels like I've been practicing this for 20 years. But I recall somebody who mentioned in a conversation, whenever you are trying to communicate and help somebody understand something, whether that be a mission, whether it's to a small task, you are genuinely responsible the how they receive that message. And it's everything from what the message is, the way it's communicated, the tone, the language level they're willing to receive it at, frankly, the language level they could receive it at. And for the most part, in my work at least, I see messages go out, requests, instructions, commands, and there is a giant assumption that the capacity for receipt is high. And I find it very, very interesting when leaders are so dumbfounded by the fact that they say, I've repeated this 10 times and it's still not being done. Yet there's not a point of introspection to try and work out why it was that maybe their delivery was the thing that wasn't working.
Yeah. It is our responsibility to get the ball over the net and to check it got there, definitely. You can't change other people's listening, of course. What you can do is be sensitive to that, and you can check in to make sure they did get it. So that's something that's very important both sides of a conversation, actually. I have listening tools in the book. There's a lot of hints and tips in the book for listening better. So, for example, RASA, receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. And that summarize step, so receive is pay attention, appreciate is giving a little bit of feedback that you're paying attention, summarize is using the word so to repeat back what you heard or what you understood. So that's a double-ended check. I mean, if you have a conversation where the sender is checking that somebody received it and the receiver is also checking that they got it right, that's going to be a pretty effective communication. But as you say, only ask, of course, is ask questions at the end or throughout. But as you say, many managers in particular and departments also in organizations have this assumption everybody is like me, everybody knows what I know, everybody understands the way I'm thinking because this makes absolute sense to me. And that is responsible for a huge amount of rubbish marketing as well, by the way, because people sit in a marketing team and they're so close to the thing, they're thinking about it every day, all day. That's their lives and that's their entire world. So when they're sending messages out, it's really difficult for them to put themselves into the shoes of somebody who knows nothing. There's this kind of innate assumption that, they'll get this. This is simple. This is obvious. Well, no, not to everybody it isn't. So that not kind of that idea of speaking into a listening is very powerful as for a manager, for a team leader, for a salesperson, and equally for a marketing team who need to be really sensitive to the listening they're speaking into with their very expensive programs.
Everyone, if you're hearing this and hearing Julian refer to his new book, Sound Effects, as well as his TED Talks, scroll down to the show notes. You will find links to all of those there right now so you can continue to dive into this further. Julian, you mentioned before this idea of the use of sound and sonics, sonic branding. For anyone who's been involved in radio, of course, that's a really big deal. It's the primary medium with which we hear the jingle, that audiogram, the thing that makes you connect a brand to a sound. It doesn't feel to me that there have been that many brands that have spent time thinking about how to do that connection. And there are some that have. Probably the most famous of those, at least in mass markets, is McDonald's, where they've got their little jingle at the end that if you connect the two sounds to what you hear in an ad, then you'll probably go to that. But it's a very commercial approach to it, very reasonably thought through. Why are companies not spending more time trying to create that connection at an audio level, at a sound level?
Well, we're back to the same issue here, Phil, which is that they're full of people who are not listening and not really sensitive to the effect of sound on us all. So, in the book, I lay this out again, the 4 powerful effects of sound on people. Sound changes our bodies, heart rate, breathing, hormone secretions, brainwaves. It changes our feelings. You just think of music when you think of that. It changes our thinking, how well we can think. And that's where the open plan office disaster is so absolutely unbelievable, that people are still putting serried ranks of people into open plan offices and expecting them to be able to think and do knowledge work when there's somebody talking behind them. And that reduces their productivity by up to 2/3. And then sound changes what we do, how helpful we are, what we buy, how long we stay in a shop, all these kind of things. So sound is so powerful, and yet organizations are numb to this because they're full of people who are ocular. We are in a very visual, ocular culture, and especially since we invented text, email, instant messaging, portable devices. So, we're spending a huge amount of time now looking at screens, typing, where before perhaps we would have had more spoken communication. We teach reading and writing in schools, not speaking and listening. So these primal skills, which have been how we communicated entirely until about 5,000 years ago when writing was invented, they are kind of withering away. And the research is very clear that, yes, listening is declining. And as I said, you only have to look at the internet to see the effects of that, and politics and society in general, and, family groups where everybody's sitting around a table at a meal or looking at their hands and it's silent. That's Sherry Turkle's wonderful book, Alone Together, is all about that phenomenon. So if we have that lack of listening going on, it's not surprising that tiny amounts of budget are put into the way organizations present themselves for the ears. And yet that's very, very important. I think it's better than it was. I spent 20 years in audio branding, and certainly there's more doing it now than there were when I started. I think my book, Sound Business, had something to do with that. It helped to give a route map to people to think about all aspects of sound. And it's not just sonic logos. That's not the sum total of the thing. What's your telephone sound like? Does it go, press 1 for this, press 2 for that? Does it irritate the hell out of people, especially older people who hate those systems? Do you offer speaking to a real person at some point? Do you offer a callback so people don't have to sit there for 45 minutes waiting for their turn? All of those kind of things. Sound goes very deep, very fast. It's our primary warning sense because you can't see what's behind you, where you can hear it, and you can't see in the dark. You can hear. So that sound is a very visceral sense. And if you upset people through their ears, it's very powerful. So really, I wouldn't say every organization should be lavishing millions on audio branding, but they should all ask the question, how are we presenting ourselves for the ears of the people who come across us? Whether it's phone, whether it's video, social media, whether it's websites, whether it's physical spaces that we control. It could be our noisy trucks, waking people up at 4 a.m. for whatever reason. Anything, absolutely anything, needs to be paid attention to because it all has a powerful effect.
With your experience, what brands have you found over the years have done this really, really well? And I ask that because whenever I put on my Bose headphones, for example, the noise cancelling headphones, there is that that pulse of sound that you get to tell you that it's just switched on. It's a very familiar sound. It's a sound that brings you closer to the product itself. To give people a sense who have not really ever paid attention to this, who are some of the brands that have really taken that subtle but very important step to make sure that sound is part of their brand?
Well, sometimes it's not that intentional or strategic. Apple springs to mind. When somebody fires up a Mac in an airport or somewhere else, you know what just happened because you get that very familiar bong. And it's been that way for decades. So they've been wise enough not to mess about with it. Whereas Windows used to change the switch-on sound with every release to a completely new sound and spend lots of money doing that, actually. And I never understood why they would want to do that because there's no continuity. Great brands, I think, are about continuity. Intel is a great example where, not many people could draw Intel's logo, but I'm sure most people are already thinking, da-da-da-da. It's very, very simple, very powerful, and it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars to them as a brand asset, that Sonic logo. So, I mean, there's a couple of examples of people who've done it well. You mentioned McDonald's. That da 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 is very familiar to people. It's global, it doesn't change anywhere in the world, and they've stuck with it again for a long time. So it's been a powerful part of their brand. And of course, if you've got Netflix in Australia, that will mean something to you.
It does, yes.
So, there are a lot of brands who do this pretty well and who make it a strong part of their marketing, of their branding, but many don't. And some of them have done very weird things. There was a very odd Sonic logo for Mercedes a few years ago, which was a sort of spooky child soprano thing that sounded like it was out of a ghost film or something. That didn't last very long because somebody eventually realized, hang on, this is nothing to do with Mercedes.
No.
So, you have to be careful. It does take intelligence, just like any part of branding, really. Is that brand really us? Is it expressing something that's true about our values and about who we are to our customers?
Let's talk about the Listening Society. This is an activity which I know you're dedicating a lot of time to. I'd love you to share with us what this is and why it's very important. I'm personally excited to get involved with this. And I guess I'm helping leaders to understand the importance of how to listen as a way to then form partnerships with a whole range of different organizations. And I feel quite strongly about how important that is in order to make a win-win situation between multiple parties in a very busy commercial environment. So tell us a little bit about the Listening Society and how we can become involved.
Well, yes, there's two parts to that question, and I'll try to cover them both. So the Listening Society is my life's work now, because listening is so in decline in this world, and the results that we see around us are deeply disturbing to me. I have two quite small children, a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I'm worried about the world they're going to grow up in. And the direction of travel is not good. It's towards conflict and judgmentalism and disconnection. And I am really concerned about that. And we see the results of it popping up around us in wars now on the planet, when, I never thought I'd see another war in Europe. So it's concerning, and it's costing, on a more simple financial level, it's costing business trillions, really, over the world. I mean, this lost business, lost productivity. I mentioned just open plan offices. If you're losing 2/3 of the productivity of knowledge workers in open plan offices, there are tens of millions of people who are paid quite a lot of money. You're talking about trillions going down the drain across the world, really. And so it's very important at every level, in our families, in our businesses, teams. Listening is always essential for a good leader. I spoke to, now let me just try and remember his name. He was the CEO of the Franklin Covey organization, and he was a lovely man. I spoke to him for my last book, which is called How to Be Heard, which is precisely about these skills. And it'll probably come back to me in a moment. But he said that he considered the most important skill of a great leader to be listening. Because how can you lead people if you don't understand them and know what makes them tick, what their fears are, what their aspirations are, what their weak spots are, what their strengths are? Also, how can you lead an organization if, like, unfortunately, some leaders I've come across in organizations, you won't hear bad news and you shoot the messenger? It's really important to hear the bad news, and it's really important to hear difference of opinion. So I think diversity of leadership in any organization is critical, and that does require a very determined form of listening, because you're listening to people who are not like you, people who are different, maybe irritating, maybe people that you don't like, who have got important aspects, visions, perspectives to contribute to a decision, which otherwise you might have made completely wrongly because you've got one perspective. And you needed that other person saying, hang on, you can't do that. And you're going, oh, yes, I can. No, oh, no, listen. Oh, no, I can't do that. He's right or she's right. So Listening is critical for leaders. It's critical for sales. And so is very much part of this is having a good relationship with silence again, because if I do a close, or let's call it an open, it's an opening to something happening. So Phil, what do you think about that? Stop. Don't say anything. And if you have an uncomfortable relationship with silence that you can't go more than 5 or 10 seconds, you're going to pile in with something else and lose that moment. And also, the stats now show that salespeople have the proportion of speaking and listening exactly round the wrong way on average. The sweet spot for selling is listen 2/3, speak 1/3. Most salespeople speak 2/3 and listen 1/3. So it's just another example of how listening really is being lost, and it's undermining so much in business, in families, and in society. So that's a long-winded way of saying the Listening Society is my answer to this. I've created an online community on the world's leading community platform, which is called Circle. And I'm populating it with lots and lots of resources. So it's a place people can come. You can think of it like a library or an amazing filing cabinet full of goodies that will help you to listen better, courses, podcasts that I've done over the years. I've like 38 podcasts in there, I think, that I've done with fascinating people over the years. I've got this archive that I'm putting in. Some of the courses are courses which have been hundreds of pounds to buy, and they're all in there for members of the Listening Society to access at their liberty, and without any extra charges. There's new material being produced. I'm doing interviews with interesting people. I've got about 65 people on my list to do on a roughly a weekly basis, hopefully, asking them about sound and listening and how it works for them and their suggestions. But to be honest, Phil, the most important thing to me, because we've only just opened this and there's only a few people in there yet, the most important thing to me is to grow it to a vibrant community where there's lots of people in there helping each other, putting their doubts and fears and questions in there, their problems and challenges in there, and having somebody else, not me, somebody else from the community, which will be full of amazing people, because I do know quite a lot of amazing people and I'm asking them all in. So the other members will be able to help and put their wisdom in and their solutions to those challenges or problems. So it's a place to come and share and be shared with. And it's a place which I hope is going to become a nexus for regenerating listening in the world and really changing that direction of travel I was talking about. So that's what the Listening Society is all about. I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited that you're going to join, and I look forward to seeing you in there. It's for parents, it's for managers, it's for salespeople, it's for professionals, it's for audiophiles, it's for pro audio people, acousticians, you name it. Anybody who cares about listening and sound, I think we'll find lots in there, and it hopefully will become this wonderful, vibrant community of people who care. That's what I'm looking forward to.
I'm excited to sign up today. And there are two things that come to my mind as you say that. And it was just to go to that point of listening you mentioned before in the management sales side. In my last company, I put in a value, which was, I live by this today, I have a genuine fear of missing out on an important perspective. And the need to create space for somebody to, even if they don't have the right language at the time, to produce that thinking and to provide space for that exchange to make sense of whatever that half-formed thought was, I think is hugely important. And it's one of those, as I'm now coaching, it's a very different skill set to try and master, but it is something that I find in every conversation, it is the pursuit of doing that, because everybody, like you say, is very different. And I do go back to a very early memory of, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, going to an air show where our Royal Australian Air Force was there, and they had a stall where young aspiring pilots could go up and put a fighter pilot helmet on. And you would put this helmet on and you would hear all the chatter, and it's all recorded, but the chatter of what it must sound like to be a pilot, listening to all the things going on. And it was a little bit cooler too. And there was all these effects that you were being thrust on you as a young mind, and thinking, there is nothing more cool than what is happening in this helmet right now. And I'm wearing that helmet. And fast forward, 35 years, and you find now that in these very sophisticated headpieces that pilots are now wearing, they've worked out how to, in a fighter pilot context, be able to give you signals about when an aircraft is behind you when you're traveling at 800 kilometers an hour. And somehow that math and that thinking has gone into helping provide one input into 100 decisions, that are happening every few seconds. And so the people who are thinking about this, there is enormous amounts of technology and interesting things going on to make that one input possible. But I will always be grateful for having had put that helmet on, because I actually think from a very young age, it helped me listen very differently to what is around.
Oh, that's wonderful. And actually, there's a chapter in the book about what's to come with audio technology, which is quite exciting, I think. We are
absolutely
just on the verge of audio user interface with everything. And so I think within 5 years, this whole thing of tapping on screens and reading will be largely displaced by speaking to whatever it is, artificial intelligence, probably intelligent agents, speaking a bit like, Jarvis in Iron Man, having a regular conversation with the thing and it speaking back to you. And as that moves forward, I think we'll end up with devices implanted in our skulls using bone conduction to do this, where you won't have anything visible at all. So it's kind of an enhanced human, if you like, being able to communicate with people remotely with the internet to make things happen without having to lose the use of your fingers and your eyes for half an hour, without any bloody 6-digit codes being sent to you every 5 minutes to check that you're actually who you are, and all that kind of stuff, which we have to suffer now. That'll all be gone. Apps, yesterday. Forget it. It'll just be a conversation with an intelligent agent who knows everything about you and interfaces with the outside world, which incidentally raises some very interesting questions for marketing and business again, because that's a gatekeeper. Now, who's going to own the gatekeeper? Is it going to be you or me owning our entity, or will it be one of the large technology companies or somebody else who might be giving it to us for free in order to get our data and get access to us? So there's going to be a battle there for that intermediary, and it'll be very interesting to see which way that plays out. But I do think that we're about to enter an age where the voice and the ears will become more important than they ever have been, or than they have been for certainly the last 50 or 60 years. However, that doesn't mean people will be listening consciously to the sound around them, because if we've got devices implanted in our skulls, we might well be walking around listening to music the whole time. Now, I love music. Absolutely wonderful. I'm a musician. I adore music, but not when it's imposed on me, and not when it's mindless, and not if it takes away from our relationship with the world around us, which is very, very important. Totally get it. If you're in a noisy city, you can have something much nicer to listen to. But we've lost that connection with nature. And that's where the whole movement of, for example, biophilia in architecture is coming from, which is all about reconnecting with the things that we evolved to have around us, and stopping the ecocide that we're carrying out with, for example, deafening whales so they can't communicate in the way they used to. Blue whales used to be able to communicate across entire oceans, thousands of kilometers, with their incredibly low frequency sound. Not any longer, because there are 60,000 ships out there at any one time making a heck of a noise, deafening them. We've created an auditory fog in the seas, and they are down to 1/10 of their previous range. So, the book goes into all of that kind of thing. And it's again, as I said earlier, I think it's very much about taking responsibility for the sound that we create as a race and individually, and for the sound that we consume and impose on each other very much. And we do that by conscious listening, which always, in my experience and in my view, always leads to understanding. And that is critical. Whether it's understanding a team, understanding a business and its challenges and how to move forward, there's not a vertebrate on this planet that doesn't have ears, and they use those ears to be alert and responsive to danger, always listening, and to find food and mates and good things as well. And I think the analogy is absolutely accurate for an organization. You need to be attentive in that way. You need to be listening, not necessarily literally all the time, but I say do that too. But, metaphorically, you need to be sensitive to what's out there, to spot the danger coming, to spot the opportunities, and to move forward and grow.
Tell me about listening zones. If somebody is hearing this right now and thinking, I need to create a way to save, protect, nurture my mind, and I need to find quiet spaces to make that work. And it might not necessarily be a quiet space, but if we think about how you move through your day, whether you're going to an office, whether you're working at home, whatever the things are that occupy your day, and you're trying to find those quiet spaces, is there a tool set or an approach that you can recommend that people could implement so that they do get that respite or that downtime they need to be able to think a little bit clearly?
Well, yes, just on a personal level, as I recommend in the book, befriend silence, get back into a relationship with silence and give yourself a couple of doses of silence a day, maybe just 3 minutes. Sit quietly somewhere. Might be a bathroom, a closet, wherever it is that you can find relative peace and quiet. Just sit quietly and reset your ears and recalibrate, and it will really help you to listen. On an organizational level, then we need to be thinking about quiet working space quite seriously. There is a new movement in office design called activity-based working, or ABW, which also is aligned with biophilia too. And you put those two things together and you can create an office where there are different spaces for different types of work. And of course, not just different types of work, but different types of people, because we're now understanding about neurodiversity and that there are many different types of people who require different environments to do their best, whatever kind of work it is that they're doing. So the problem with open plan is this whole one size fits all approach that we've had now for decades, unfortunately, which is a bit like the old fashioned Taylorism of the early 20th century, when it was serried ranks of exactly identical desks where everybody was doing exactly identical. It's treating an office like a machine. That was the whole thesis behind Taylorism. Well, we don't quite do that now, but there is nevertheless this idea that everybody just sits at the desk in a big open plan office and gets on with whatever they're doing, which might be, the accounts. It might be writing creative pieces for marketing. It might be selling and being boisterous. And if you put people like that next to each other, you're going to get a lot of conflict, because some people are trying to think and other people are not. They're being very loud and, out there. And that's not effective. So I think it's important to create different spaces for different types of work and be sensitive to the teams that we're sitting next to each other. You really don't want to have, your creatives in an advertising agency next to the account team who are trying to frantically write a presentation for tomorrow morning when there's a boombox going off in the creative team, because they love being, stimulated with other people's creativity naturally. That doesn't work very well. So let's think carefully about the sonic environments which are going to encourage different types of work, different types of people, and create those in an office and encourage people to move themselves to where they can be most effective. And that also requires teaching the people to be conscious of the effect of sound on them, which is another good thing. So I think that's very important. And that's the answer to your question about how we create these environments. We're being sensitive. Everybody's different, by the way. I mean, I work best in silence, but I wouldn't impose that on everybody. Imposing sound conditions on people is quite a fraught and dangerous thing to do.
Yes,
that's why a lot of people get antsy about pipe music in shops. They don't like it because it's an imposition. They didn't get asked. They have no choice. So it's very good to give people choice. And again, that's part of activity-based working. You want a quiet working space, go to the third floor because that's where it is. Or you want to be, in a boisterous sales team, that's the second floor is full of those people. It's great. So, if we create those different spaces and encourage people to move to them, we solve a lot of the problems of lost productivity, of ill health, of stress, and so forth, which exist currently in many, many offices.
Julian, I've got one last question for you, but before I get to that, tell me where we can point people to learn more about this fabulous new book, the society, your website. Where should we direct people?
Well, the book is out already in the UK. Now, I'm not sure which edition will be available in Australia, but the UK edition is published and hopefully available. So it's available on all the regular channels. It's called Sound Effects with an A, not effects, but effects, because that's what it's all about. It's coming out in America in just a few days, actually. I think June the 3rd is publication date in the USA. And then it's going to come out a little later in German, Italian, Japanese, and Mandarin. So it'll be doing the rounds of the world and hopefully making a difference everywhere. So that's where you can get it, just Amazon or your local book selling website. The Listening Society is global, and I would love to offer your listeners a free week of membership to have a look and see if they like it. And you can get that at the URL betterlistening.today/yes. That's
Excellent.
the simple URL, which will give you a page where you can sign up for 1 week's free membership and see what you like. And if you like it, it's less than £1 a day to be a member of the Listening Society going forward. So it's not a big investment. I would have said less than a cup of coffee. And these days, it's a lot less than a cup of coffee a day.
Yeah, that's right.
So, come and join us. I'd love to see you in there, and let's make a difference in the world, to the world's listening.
I will be there later today. I'm excited for this. Julian, I always love talking to you, and I take so much from the reset that comes from being reminded around how we should be listening and what that means for not just partnerships, but the way that we interact with people outside of work and across different boundaries. Because as we talked about before we started this conversation, if there was ever a time to listen more and speak less in the world and in history, now would be that time. Yeah. So let me ask you this question. If somebody has listened, has dived into your work, and they're thinking, I need to do this better, what is the one act that you would encourage them to try and make habitual in their days so that they can develop a stronger relationship with sound?
Well, I think silence is probably the most important one. I'm not saying the world should be silent, but we need to reestablish the relationship with it. It's the baseline. It's what makes language make sense. It's the gaps between the words, which are the important bits that stop it all from being just chaos and cacophony. So that exercise of 2 little periods of silence a day is absolutely crucial and fundamental. And if I can have just a little addendum to that, if you want something everybody can go off and do immediately after listening to this, it would be next time you have a conversation with somebody, put everything down, look at them, and really listen. And that means switching off your head. It's not, Stephen Covey, I think it was, described it as waiting to speak. You're not waiting to speak. You're listening. It's almost meditation. You're being empty and you're listening to the person and trusting that when it comes to your turn, your mouth will know what to do. So it's a very peaceful place to be. Put everything down, give them your full attention. You might well get the response, "What are you doing?" Because most people are not used to being listened to like that.
That's
We're
right.
very used to being partially listened to. There's nothing wrong with partial listening. I'm not saying that there's anything right or wrong about this, but it's wonderful to exercise the ability to completely, consciously, wholly, fully, properly listen to somebody. And it's a great gift to give to anyone, especially, by the way, children. So Go listen to a child. That would be a great thing to do.
Julian, it is always such a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm looking forward to, I know you've got more books and more things in you to produce, but I would like to be talking to you more regularly, because this is one of those refreshing experiences that always should remind us about the power of, in your case, sound, but it is just so fundamental to everything that we're trying to do in a very busy world. So thank you for giving me the time today. It's a pleasure to see you as always.
Well, absolutely. And it's always a pleasure to see you as well. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Before you go, I have a quick question for you. Do you worry that you're wasting time, money, and credibility with the wrong partnerships? It's exhausting to pretend everything's fine while secretly worrying that you've made the wrong call. You see others thriving with the right connections, and you're stuck wondering if you're missing out on opportunities that could really elevate your business. Well, the good news is that ends today, because you can download my free partner calculator that instantly assesses if a partner is an ideal fit for your business. It'll give you the clarity and the confidence and the edge you've been looking for to secure high-value partnerships that not only finally unlock business growth, but also help you reclaim your time. The link is in the show notes. And I'm really glad you're here. I'm Coach Phil Hay Sinclair. I'll see you in the next episode.